Shale 240 says that, for example, a lot of people see hunting as morally wrong, but to me and many others, it's necessary to prevent multiple bad outcomes because, unlike humans, deer can't create for themselves. They eat plants, which takes away food from other deer and other herbivores. In other words, you need to call the population. Um, but the last bit here is what also I want to read. Even in cases where it's moral for me, like I'm strongly against crimes against defenseless people, but history of crime cases has shown that not everybody shares the same morality as I do, so therefore it's not objective. Also, Hambone says that is literally an entirely different question. So, what are we dealing with here? The question of whether or not morality is objective is a category error because morality isn't the sort of thing that can be objective. Moral reasoning can be done well or poorly. That is to say, it can validate on its own metrics. Either it can validate on its own metrics or falsify on its own metrics by a contradiction. But the key takeaway, the reason I made that short, or the reason I was commenting in that fashion, is to clarify that people do moral reasoning regardless, okay? So, for example, this guy is explaining that it's moral to hunt deer because their population needs to be culled. Okay, well, there's a lot of problems with this argument, but it is moral to hunt deer because animals don't have rights. And the reason they don't have rights is because they are not moral agents who can reason and respect the rights of other things. I know this because my cats are constantly bringing in poor defenseless little animals like lizards and mice and killing them in tortuously slow ways. So my point is regarding his argument there is both utilitarian, is claiming that we can always determine the morality of something by anticipating the likely outcomes of it or how helpful it is in some other frame of reference, which is not a moral question ever, right? Moral questions come before utility questions. So it's not the case that sometimes we can determine what's moral or not by anticipating the outcome. We never can. We have to determine the morality of something before we evaluate its utility or do an impact calculus. Once we determine something's legitimate, that means it's morally permissible, and it can be undertaken as an action without incurring moral consequences, such as hunting deer. That does not mean that there's not virtue ethics as well. Virtue ethics are different than what you might call value ethics, which is, if you prioritize justice as a value, then we can use very mechanistic moral reasoning, and it's the only adequate normative framework for determining something's morality for objective purposes. That is to say, it is objectively the case, for example, that the globe, the earth is not flat, okay? But not everybody agrees with that. So it is the case that other people disagreeing with you doesn't render something subjective. As you indicated in the end of your comment there, that because other people have different moralities, that it's not objective. But other people have different opinions about the shape of the earth, and I don't think you'd probably complain if I said it's objectively so that the earth is a globe. Now, Hambone says, when I ask the question in the short, which is whether or not morality is objective, is the wrong question. The right question is whether or not we're doing it well. Hambone is correct to say that's an entirely different question. Well, that's because the initial question is a category error. And I probably should have specified that in the thing or whatnot. But this is what happens with category errors in every instance. For example, if you've got a question that says, is that duck a Christian or a Muslim? The answer is neither, right? It's not. The question is not Christian, it's not Muslim, and it's not something else either, right? It's that ducks can't be those kind of things. That's the answer. So the correct question would be something like, if you wanted to evaluate the duck's religion, it would be something like, assuming a duck's owner, if it has one, assigns it a religion, and assuming that the owner's religion is the same as that to which he assigns the duck, and we know this duck's owner, what religion is this duck? Now, in that context, you could answer it, right? So, the thing is, it's a category error to say, is morality objective? Because people are objective or not, data is objective or not, morality is neither of those things. Whether or not something has a status of moral or not, a given action, is something that we can disagree about, but we can't disagree about whether it calculates out as immoral within a specific normative framework and both be right. So, in other words, it might be the case that that commenter doesn't want to agree with me that there's any possible way of calculating morality objectively, but it's not the case that okay, so that guy and I might disagree about whether or not, say, hunting's moral. We don't, but that's fine. We'd certainly disagree about why. But it's not the case that we could disagree if we were calculating it under the same framework and both be right. Which means, like, for example, if I say 8 times 8 is 64 and 10 times 10 is 100, well, 8 times 8 is 64 in base 10. 10 times 10 is 100 in base 10. But if somebody else is using base 8 and they say 8 times 8 is 100, they're correct within their frame. And if I say in base 10 it's 64, I'm correct within my frame. And if they're saying within your frame, Eric, I say it's a different number, then they're incorrect. We both can't be correct within the same frame of reference. So the question about whether or not morality is objective is really a question about whether people are being objective about morality. And when you're calculating moral questions, you can be objective about whether the calculation is being done correctly within the normative framework. You can't necessarily come to an agreement about why that normative framework has primacy, or if it does, but the reality is objectivity is something that's limited to agents, right? We can have data that's objective, but that just means that it's data that we can all access equally and then either engage with that data subjectively or objectively. And subjectively and objectively in that sense means detached from the idea of object and subject here, because what it really means is disinterested and interested calculus. So if I'm using an interested calculus, then I want the answer to be 64, let's say. It doesn't matter if I get corrected and told we're doing this in base 8, it's 100 is the answer. They don't want to, in that instance, the person doesn't want to be corrected, so they're subjectively determining the status on their own accord. In some other instance, somebody might want to be correct rather than not be corrected. Accordingly, they'll say, okay, I update my answer, I was wrong. They're being objective about the correctness of their own answer. So it's important that we, in general, remember that no reality happens except via humans paying attention. No reality that we can communicate about it anyway. And that all manner of reality that we can't communicate about is, and is some expression of human attention at its root. Ergo, objectivity and subjectivity are human behavioral traits or descriptors, not descriptors of an abstract concept that somehow exists outside of human attention, which would, of course, be impossible. Thanks for watching. I love you all, and don't forget to eat plenty of cheese.